sponsor, Madam Chair, if I may.
Please.
Senator Leach, do you believe it's the government's role to protect the health, safety, and welfare of the public?
Senator Leach.
Overall, yes. That's why we have a military. I'm sorry, Madam Chair. Is that Senator Navarrete? I was looking up here. I thought it was going to be Mr. Pace. I'm sorry. So was that Senator Navarrete? Madam Chair, Senator Navarrete, that's why we have a military.
Okay.
Madam Chair, Senator Pace here. I have a question for the sponsor.
Please, Senator Pace.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and Senator Leach. So I just want to clarify one thing. This does not prevent a state office, agency, or political subdivision of the state to discipline members of a profession that perform an act that is unprofessional in terms of, I mean, we're talking in this conversion therapy. So from my understanding, and maybe staff can help clarify this only allows what you would call here advice, counsel, guidance, or speech communication. This does not protect any physical forms of therapy that may have been used for conversion therapy. So my point is, are we protecting the conversation, or are we protecting the physical acts? Like, as we know from history, there have been some electrotherapies and other things like that used in conversion therapy. This would only say that the speech, counsel, advice is allowed, but this would still allow a board, if found to be unprofessional, to discipline a member who uses a inappropriate methodology.
2 points, Madam Chair and
Senator Leach.
Thank you for the question. 2 points I would make. Where you started off, I had an answer formulated that I thought you were going down the route, and maybe you were for a second. There are protections in the system for malpractice. If you were going there, I thought maybe you were headed that way for a second, but then you got into other practices such as metal shocks or whatever. I would answer, and I would ask you to ask other members that are going to testify behind me and after me. The allegations of that have been widespread, but have been debunked over the years. Yet, while there's still a repeated effort to discredit this type of counseling, and some disagree with such methods other than talk therapy have not been. Today, it is not conversion therapy; it is conversation therapy.
Madam Chair and Senator Leach, so just to clarify, this bill does not allow for those conversion therapy strategies, but does allow for conversation therapy.
Conversation therapy, yes.
Okay.
Madam Chair, so Senator Pace, get with the issue.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Senator Leach.
Okay, we're going to have 4 from each side, 3 minutes. We'll start with David Catalano. Welcome to committee. If you'll state your name for the record, and Vice Chair will set the timer and try and keep us on track. Welcome to committee, David.
Madam Chair, 1 second. This is Senator Leach. I have another committee. I'm going to stay as long as I can. I have another committee starting at 9 o'clock that I'm a vice chair of, so I may, if you don't see me, it's not for lack of interest in what we're doing here.
Will do. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Senators. I'm grateful to be here. So I will be sharing my testimony in support of SB 1482. My name is David Catalano, and I was a licensed associate counselor as well as a certified rehabilitation counselor. In my duties as a counselor, I had an occasion to meet with clients who struggled with their sexual orientation. If the client initiated a conversation regarding religious beliefs and how they squared with their same-sex attraction, I would engage in that conversation. I've had clients ask what the Bible says about homosexuality, and we have discussed that topic specifically based on the client's leading. My counsel consists of talking through the issue, asking questions, helping my client process his or her thoughts and feelings. and work through struggles. It is strictly talk therapy. I had certain groups of people who believe in only affirming a client's same-sex attraction, even if that's not what the client wants, and they would push back hard on me. It eventually cost me my job. But that is not the answer. Silencing one form of professional speech is not only unconstitutional, it does not serve the client. It restricts clients to one option, robbing them of honest self-assessment, free and open discussion with a profession they can trust with their deepest thoughts and feelings. The goal should always be to assist the client to find healing, not to lead them to a particular viewpoint of the counselor's choosing or the government's dictates. But that takes exploring the concerns of the client, which may be a conflict between religious beliefs and feelings of sexuality. If we are all putting the client's well-being first, a therapist must have the freedom to discuss whatever is troubling the client. The court seems to agree bans on my freedom of speech as a professional counselor violate my First Amendment right while also violating my client's freedom of speech. I cannot imagine looking a struggling client in the eye while being forced to say something or withhold something that could help my client find healing, simply because it doesn't comport with the government's viewpoint. So I encourage you to pass SB 1482 and allow counselors to counsel and clients to seek professional help they choose. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Members, do you have any questions for David Catalano? All right, we will move on to John O'Brien. Matt Salmon.
Matt, you're on mute.
Welcome to committee, Dr. Salmon.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My name is Matt Salmon, and I am a child, adolescent, and adult psychiatrist licensed in Arizona. I also suffered through the so-called therapy that is named reparative or conversion therapy, and it claims to change the sexuality and gender identity of LGBT individuals. My therapist convinced me that my father, Congressman Matt Salmon, was to blame. He also challenged my ability to even trust myself, eroding away my sense of self, ability to trust in others, and the attachment that I had with my parents, which you may recognize are similar effects seen in psychological torture. He even organized a camping trip where he convinced a group of minors to skinny dip with adult males as part of the recovery process. And when I refused to participate, he taunted me and told the others that it was a result of my body image issues that I had confided in during therapy. He is a licensed professional in Arizona who claims the right to do this based on the religious belief of the families that he preys upon in their vulnerable state. You know me, many of you know me and my family and are familiar with the damage that it caused. You know, Madam Chair, you know of my passion for working with LGBT youth and other youth with mental health challenges, many of whom have severe PTSD or other mental illness as a result of these psychologically abusive practices. You must vote no. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Salmon. Members, are there questions? All right, seeing none.
Madam Chair.
Navarrete as well.
Senator Navarrete.
Thank you. And thank you, Dr. Simon, for speaking and sharing some of your testimony. You know, I knew walking into this committee that it was going to be a bit tense for me and just obviously bring up even my own baggage of dealing with coming out and dealing, you know, and growing up in the church and growing up where it wasn't accepted. So I just want to applaud you for your courage to, you know, to staying dedicated to this path, to staying dedicated to working with these youth. One of the questions that I have for you is, through your work, what is the level, you know, one of the things that I think is constantly left out of this conversation is this term shame. And decades ago, I think that shame was a lot greater because there was a lot, there was just less tolerance over this issue and understanding over the LGBTQ community and over conversion therapy and what that truly meant. Can you describe to me maybe a bit, or talk to me about the shame and that weight that goes on when you're working with one of your patients?
Yeah, it is probably one of the hardest things to work through. Most individuals, as individuals, we grow up believing that our parents are the ultimate when it comes to guiding us throughout our lives. And the way that our parents communicate with us as we grow up is ultimately how we talk to ourselves, because it's the language that we end up incorporating into our own sense of self and self-talk. And so anytime you have are being taught that your own ability to recognize or establish your own identity is wrong, that it creates an intense amount of shame and a belief that a person, if even their own parents, are going to have this idea about themselves, it is something that they will carry with them for the rest of their lives. If they can heal from it, it's still something that will always be with them, though it might not hurt as much when they ultimately have gone through that healing, and oftentimes requiring many years of therapy to do so, which, as we all know, is not that easy for most people to even access. And so many people will end up going without ever having the opportunity to be able to spend the time that it would take to repair such an issue. When you look at, if a person only gets out of that kind of environment at maybe 18 at the earliest, then that's still 18 years of language that they have incorporated into their own self-identity, which will take, numerous years to even work through resolve.
Thank you for sharing.
Thank you.
Madam Chair?
Oh, I'm sorry. Who's?
Senator Townsend.
Senator Townsend.
Thank you. I have a question primarily for the vice chair, because I think he might know the answer, or maybe the sponsor and possibly Dr. Salmon. First of all, I want to say to Dr. Salmon, I'm sorry that those things happened, and the ridicule that happened to you at the lake, and the breach of confidentiality that you experienced in any situation, I think is illegal and unacceptable. So my question is to the vice chair, would you have knowledge after listening to this testimony, would any part of those things that were egregious that happened be allowed and permissible, or would that be considered something that would be up for review for a violation of conduct, the code of conduct and the standards of practice? It seems like that is not up to the standards of practice and possibly could result in discipline. Is this bill going to return therapy to that state where people could be able to do that? And would it be up to the parents to try to discern who's a good counselor and who isn't? Or how do we unpack this story, which is disturbing, but how do we unpack this in relation to this bill? And maybe the sponsor wants to react to that as well.
I'm wondering if
Madam Chair,
our testimony, experts signed up can't answer that question. Did you want to answer that, Senator Pace?
Madam Chair, I'm happy to offer my opinion, but I know that we have others who can speak, and I can happily give my opinion in closing remarks on what I believe the language will do, but I don't need to change that topic right off the bat.
Madam Chair, if I may.
Please.
And thank you for the question, Senator Townsend. And I'll just share from my own personal experience. And again, growing up in the church.
and Senator Navarrete, I'm not sure if we're not going to get through our agenda today if we're going to be commenting along the way. We have to just direct questions I'm sorry. We have 20 bills. So I'm just going to have to ask you to direct questions to those that are testifying and then explain your vote on.
Question, Madam Chair. I'm responding to Senator Townsend on her question of what that experience was like, and I'm just trying to share my experience of what
I know, and I'm trying to direct us to get through the agenda, and so I'm going to have to impose a little bit of discipline because we have others that need to testify, and some of
Madam Chair,
you'll be able to explain your
so that we can have a space where we can have these conversations. I was simply trying to answer my colleagues' question from firsthand experience, but it sounds like you have a difficult time trying to hear that, so I'll go ahead and let someone else answer that question.
Thank you. All right. First, we will hear from Helena Brooke.
Good morning. First off, I just wanted to suggest that what Mr. Catalano says that he would like to do in support of clients' self-exploration is already allowed and ethical in our professions. We go where the client needs to go, and that's already allowed, and I can go into that in questions if you have any. My name is Helena Brooke, and I'm a therapist here in Arizona. I'm also knee-deep in PhD research on therapists, counselors, and how they cope with board discipline and ethics mistakes, so I've watched a lot of board meetings and hearings. From this vantage point, it's clear that implementing this bill would go beyond disaster. It would cause a full-on crisis for the 6 professions governed by the psychology and behavioral health boards. Other people have talked about what some refer to as conversion therapy. Therapy, I guess, is in quotes. I'm going to break with some colleagues here and say that adults should be able to procure whatever services they want. But the government does not have a right to single out specific professions, demand they make a home for these practices, and insist that they adopt an anything goes policy in lieu of the standards that keep them accountable. This bill isn't about religious freedom. We already welcome religiously informed counseling practices within our professions, and at least 4 of our state's licensure track master's programs are at Christian schools, 2 of which are seminaries. And I did my practicum at a Christian counseling practice, and they're wonderful. Don't enact a government overreach that would seize the professions we've built for decades. Our ethical standards demand that we not sit by while harm is done in our name or by our peers. Passing this bill steals the right to practice under the basic ethical tenets of healthcare. It commands whole professions to abandon our ethical commitment to the public that when they seek the help of a therapist for their family, their marriage, their children, or themselves, that they know they can trust that their provider will only work with them in ways that are safe and don't cause harm. This is called beneficence and non-malfeasance in our professions. You can't just decide that a faith leader or anyone invoking God, including folks who've lost their actual licenses, should be able to exploit the public's trust. And I want to say that my heart goes out to Dr. Salmon for sharing his story. But it can be a lot of other ways that these harms can happen, and they might not happen in such obvious ways, but the impacts are very long lasting. We aren't seeing this kind of government overreach toward pharmacists and lawyers, only therapists. Surely you can find a way to advance religious liberty without handicapping our profession's freedom to function alongside other licensed communities. I urge you to vote no on the bill and to just, work with it a little bit more. You guys have been doing this for a long time. Ms. Barto, you're actually my senator, so I know you've been at this a while. There's a way to put language out there that protects people who are doing religious things without encroaching on professions that are obligated to monitor ourselves and to hold our peers and our professions to really high standards. And I'll yield back.
Thank you, Helena. Any questions for Helena Brooke? All right, Matt Sharp, welcome to committee.
Good morning. Thank you, Chairman Barto and members of the committee. My name is Matt Sharp, and I'm Senior Counsel with Alliance Defending Freedom, the nation's largest legal advocacy organization dedicated to defending religious liberty. The people lose when the government is the one deciding which ideas should prevail. That's what the Supreme Court held a few years ago when it struck down California's effort to dictate what pro-life pregnancy centers could say in their interactions with women seeking help. In its opinion in Nifla v. Becerra, the court emphasized that it has long protected the First Amendment rights of professionals, such as the therapists and counselors we're here talking about today. And it specifically called out restrictions in California and New Jersey that banned certain counseling related to a person's sexual attractions or gender identity, the so-called conversion therapy bans. You would think that when the Supreme Court identifies certain laws as constitutionally problematic, that government officials would take notice. But unfortunately, places like Pima County have ignored that and enacted their own counseling censorship laws that restrict the private, faith-driven conversations between a patient and his or her counselor. SB 1482 is a necessary step to stop the spread of these unconstitutional ordinances in Arizona. The government has no business telling people what personal goals they can and can't pursue. If consistent with a person's religious belief, a man with same-sex attractions, for example, wants to marry a woman and have a family, that's his choice. And the government can't keep him from pursuing that goal simply because they disagree with it. But nor can the government censor the speech of a religious therapist and counselors who are sought after because of their faith. These counselors simply listen to patients, they talk with them, and they offer suggestions to help the patient live consistent with their religious beliefs. The patient is always free to disagree and walk away. And to specifically answer Senator Pace's and Senator Townsend's questions, if a therapist engages in abusive or unethical conduct, he can be disciplined. If he hurts a client, he can be sued for malpractice. Nothing in SB 1482 would change that because the bill is only focused on speech, not conduct. But no counselor should be forced in the course of very private discussions to be the government's mouthpiece to impose its preferred views about human sexuality. Enacting SB 1482 would even help Arizona avoid the fate of Florida, where the 11th Circuit recently issued a sweeping ruling striking down local therapy bans. The court there warned, quote, "People have intense moral, religious, and spiritual views about sexual orientation, gender identity counseling." And that's exactly why the First Amendment does not allow communities to determine how their neighbors may be counseled about matters of sexual orientation or gender, end quote. Every person deserves the right to private conversation with a trusted counselor they choose, free from government censorship, and SB 1482 will secure that right for patients and their counselors throughout Arizona. Thank you, and I'm happy to stay online for any questions.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions for Matt Sharp? All right. Let's see. Matt Shurka?
Hi, thank you to everyone and everyone on the committee. Appreciate your time. So I am a survivor of conversion therapy. I am also the co-founder of Born Perfect, which is a national campaign to protect specifically LGBTQ minors from conversion therapy and give them the support they need after going through that experience. And I've worked to survivors on a local level and help pass local bills wherever those bills can protect those minors. I went through 5 years of conversion therapy. I started at age 16. I came from a very conservative home, a very loving family, and I was placed with a licensed professional who explained that homosexuality is a psychological condition that I developed from a trauma. And after my parents doing their due diligence and finding more than one therapist who claimed this, they decided they wanted to make sure that I was cured from any traumas that may have happened in my childhood. Because there was no specific traumas that I could recall or that my parents could recall, they immediately blamed the fact that I was too close to my mother and my two sisters. So through the therapist, which was all done through speech and nothing of physical nature, I'm not allowed to speak to my mother and my two sisters for 3 years. And they believed in that process I would learn how to identify with my male peers, how to overcome any same-sex attraction with them, and to look at my females as the opposite peers that I was supposed to have a relationship with and engage sexually when they thought I was ready. And of course, the goal would be marriage one day. This had an extreme impact to my family. We were very close. My mother was shut out of the therapy and or the process that I was going through as a minor, all through the promise of a licensed professional. I would be in and out of the hospital for anxiety attacks, depression. I went through 2 to 3 years of suicidality. I'm very thankful that I never attempted suicide. And you know, as I hear this bill, you know, my parents really wanted to do right by me, and following the licensed professionals who explained that I was suffering from a mental condition, yet every single mental health and medical association in the country has opposed conversion therapy through speech. This is not about physical harm. Those are very rare cases that we're seeing today. I also want to explain the industry. My parents spent $35,000 on my 35 years of conversion therapy. And so there's profit to be made. There's other motives that are here. A lot of these therapists have also been gay men themselves who went through the same process. And so as Born Perfect was created as a co-founder, and we've now networked with thousands of survivors around the country. We know there's hundreds of thousands around the survivors through the studies that we've seen at many universities. We know that every mental health and medical association has gone against these practices. If I knew that I was being protected by the state, or I knew that there was an option, of course, that would have saved my parents. It would have saved myself the time and pain that we all went through. And I would have had different opportunities in my life. And I want to add, coming from a conservative background, no one ever said to me that I had to give up my religious belief, or I couldn't explore. I was allowed to have any conversation I wanted. But when I was told that I had the likelihood of dying from AIDS or committing suicide if I were to come out as gay, man, and that's why I had to be straight as prescribed by my therapist, and that it was a matter of life or death, that I learned the role of males and females, and I had to not talk to my mom, is something that I was told by a therapist licensed by multiple states. I say multiple states because in my 5 years I was treated in multiple states.
Matthew, I hate to interrupt you because your story is very compelling. We do have a 3-minute time limit. If you could please conclude your remarks, I appreciate it.
Yeah, so of course, thank you. I oppose this bill, and I appreciate your time. If you have any questions.
Thank you. Members, do you have any questions for Matthew Shirkup? All right, Casey Pick, welcome to committee.
Members of the committee, my name is Casey Pick, and on behalf of the Trevor Project, I would like to thank you for this opportunity to express our strong opposition to SB 1482. For more than 20 years, Trevor has been the nation's leader in providing suicide prevention and crisis intervention services for LGBTQ youth. In that time, we have received calls, texts, and chats 24/7 from many young Arizonans who would be hurt if SB 1482 became law. Because while the bill never says so explicitly, what 1482 would do is put a government stamp of approval on the dangerous and discredited practices known as conversion therapy or sexual orientation change efforts. More than that, I fear that this short, broad, vague bill would also have countless unintended consequences that would damage public trust in mental health care as a whole, at a time when these services have really never been more important. According to a peer-reviewed article published in the American Journal of Public Health last year, youth who underwent conversion therapy were more than twice as likely to report having attempted suicide, and more than 2.5 times as likely to report multiple suicide attempts in the past year. This was based on a survey of 34,000 LGBTQ youth from across the country surveyed in the last few years, meaning that their experiences are with the kind of talk therapies that this bill would endorse and permit. Research like this and the countless tragic stories from survivors and their families are why every leading medical and mental health organization in the country has rejected these practices and warned that they put youth at risk of serious harms. But this bill, rather than protecting LGBTQ youth, would instead build a wall preventing licensing boards from upholding their professional standards of care. It would undo the work of cities and counties who are protecting their residents from this psychological snake oil. This legislature should be working with these local leaders, instead of carving out loopholes to allow people to engage in abusive practices just by claiming that they're based on conscience or belief. I'm not asking you to ban conversion therapy today. I'm just asking you not to bless it. Please vote no on SB 1482.
Thank you, Casey. Matt, can I ask you to answer some of those charges? I mean, is that what we're doing today, is blessing conversion therapy practices that are dangerous? I just really appreciate your testimony, and think maybe you can speak to that.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. Not at all. This is simply recognizing that the speech that happens in a counseling room between the counselor and the patient, and especially when it's motivated by the shared religious beliefs, that it's protected, and that the government has to take a hands-off approach, that it shouldn't be inserting itself into those conversations that happen between the counselor and the client. And again, if the counselor is doing something, some conduct, something that's abusive, nothing in this law would provide any protection for that. There's still ethical rules that would be violated. There's still malpractice laws that would be violated and all of that. But what this is doing is the government appropriately saying, when it comes to those private conversations, we are not going to interfere. We're not going to punish a counselor, punish a client for those private conversations as they're exploring different goals, different outcomes that are motivated by the client's religious beliefs and desires and what they're ultimately seeking to accomplish in that counseling.
Thank you. That's my understanding as well.
Madam Chair, can I follow up on that?
Senator Townsend, please.
Okay, so I'm looking at the language, and I feel like I'm stuck between a rock and a hard place. On one hand, my strict commitment to the First Amendment and to our freedom of speech, but on the second hand, I'm not a licensed mental health person, but I have a master's degree in infant family practice, and I'm a little concerned because it says may not discipline the members of a profession or prohibit, impose any penalty or take any adverse action against any individual who gives, receives, or consents to counsel, advice, guidance, or any other speech. Would it be possible for that person that brought or Dr. Salmon to the lake and the ridicule, could it be possible that he could be protected under this because it says you may not discipline them? And he could say, well, that was my perceived guidance. Now, how do we protect? It's not written in here what's abusive and what's not. So who gets to decide what's considered abusive? And is it possible that somebody could somehow hide under the cloak of this language to keep from being disciplined for guidance?
Matt Sharp.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Senator Townsend. So I think a couple of things on that. Number one, if we're talking about conduct, if we're talking about an activity like Dr. Salmon was referencing, that is outside of the scope of this bill. Those activities, those conducts, we're not talking about speech. We're not talking about advice anymore. And so all of that would be outside of this and would be subject to whatever ethical rules apply and also malpractice. And then that leads me to the second point. If you've got a counselor engaging, as we talked about, in even abusive speech that rises to the level of malpractice, nothing in this would shield a counselor, a therapist, or anyone in those professions from those malpractice lawsuits. And that's where they would rightfully go to a court and be able to hold them accountable for engaging in therapeutic malpractice, counseling malpractice. And again, nothing in this bill would provide any sort of shield from those claims. This is solely focused on government restrictions on what happens in those conversations.
Madam Chair, just a quick follow-up.
Senator Townsend.
And I'll be quick, I'm sorry, but this is important. Is there anywhere else in this bill that staff or someone can tell me that it says that caveat except for malpractice? Because I don't see it yet, that this is not protecting malpractice. Can we, and if it doesn't say that, are we willing to add that in to make sure that somebody doesn't get a good lawyer and gets them out of something because it didn't say that?
Matt Sharp.
Yes. Thank you, Madam Chair and Senator Townsend. So I think it's clear in that the restrictions only apply against the government, only against these governmental agencies, these licensing agencies. Malpractice claims are the individual, the patient who says, I was harmed by what you did and I'm suing you. And so by the clear language, because we're only restricting this, we're only placing limits on what the government can do, or these licensed agencies, we are not restricting anything that a private individual would have the right to do to bring complaints, claims, malpractice suits, or anything like that.
Madam Chair, Senator Pace here, I have a comment or a question for Matt Sharp.
Senator Pace.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Matt. I share the same concerns with Senator Townsend, as I don't think that this would prevent the removal of a license from someone. You're saying that it will still allow for malpractice claims, but let me pose something that when I read this, what I think about. There are religions in this world who promote hostility towards homosexuality, who promote bodily harm, and promote other things that would, in terms of your bill, could be considered advice. So let me ask you this. If I was religious, I mean, I come from a very religious family, very religious background, and homosexuality is considered a bad thing. In fact, and I'll say this, my personal religion believes that homosexuality is a sin, and that homosexuality could result in lack of eternal salvation. So we also believe in the Bible, which says that if it offends thee, you should cut it out or cut it off. You know, pluck out your eye if it offends thee. And I'll tell you, as a child, this is similar to conversion therapy, but I remember hearing it was better to be blind than it was to view pornography. I was told that by my religious leaders. So my concern with this bill is that is speech. I remember vividly as a child contemplating blindness because of that advice. So my concern is that you are protecting the free speech under a professional profession. Someone could say to a young man who is contemplating a homosexual lifestyle and be protected under this bill, they could say, it is better for you to cut off your penis than it is to be a homosexual man. And I have heard that comment said before. This bill protects that speech. While yes, I would say that is highly unprofessional, and I believe that a person who counsels that should lose their license.
Matt,
but that would be a
answer
religious
that?
belief. So Matt, let me ask you, is that possible under this bill?
Thank you, Madam Chair and Senator. First off, I want to say I think we can all agree that anyone telling a person being counseled to do something like that is abhorrent and awful. But that's not what this bill is focused on. What this bill is focused on is individuals where the client is coming to the counselor and saying, these are my religious beliefs, and I know you share them, and I want to live consistent with that. Can you help me with that? And that, unfortunately, is what we're seeing being targeted. That's what's happening in these lawsuits across the country, where counselors are being punished and facing loss of licensure or government fines and penalties because of that. We actually experienced that in New York. We represented Dr. David Schwartz, who is an Orthodox Jew who worked with others who shared his faith, that said, I want to live consistent with the Torah's teachings on human sexuality, and he helped them through all of that. Again, if a counselor is doing something that is counseling a client to self-harm, I think that's a malpractice claim. And if the counselor gets sued for that and is subject to a malpractice claim, I think on that basis he could also lose his license, right? That the counseling organization could say, anyone that loses a malpractice claim, we're going to strip away their license. So again, there's still ways to hold bad counseling and bad counselors accountable through malpractice laws, and even through neutral laws that say, neutral things that say, we're going to strip away your license if you engage in malpractice as found by a court. And nothing in this would take away those remedies and those abilities to hold counselors doing that accountable. But what it does protect is the good counselors that are working with individuals and the shared faith, helping them accomplish their goals.
And that's to that point, these are the kind of testimonies I'm hearing from those that have sent their testimonies and couldn't be with us today. One is from Deborah Waterbury, who says, I've been counseling professionally for 1 year, though I've been involved in counseling in one capacity or another for the last 15 years as a minister. The counseling therapy offered in my office is strictly talk therapy. Clients and I simply talk through their problems, finding solutions in the Bible and in relationship. This is the type of counseling I offer all of my clients, regardless of why they come in to see me. The current ordinance, as it is written, and she's speaking about one in southern Arizona, both impedes and violates my professional liberties as a counselor and as a minister. According to the Constitution, I exercise my right to freedom of religion and freedom of speech, and I uphold that for my clients as well. Any infringement on my ability to offer this kind of help, talking through one's problems from a biblical standpoint, not only infringes on these rights, it directly impedes my ability to offer the kinds of help these people are seeking from me. When someone comes to me, a biblical counselor, they expect biblical counseling. The government has never, to my knowledge, stood in the way of an individual's right to seek appropriate help, nor a professional's right to offer it. This ordinance, as it currently stands, does exactly those two things and threatens to do even more. And she wholeheartedly asked us to support the passage. And another anonymous says, I am a licensed psychologist in the state of control. I further believe that the embodiment of wisdom and justice within the context of government is found in the consistent and sincere effort to achieve mutual understanding and resolution through the free expression of ideas and beliefs for the purpose of safeguarding the rights and liberties of each individual and the betterment of the Republic. It's never found in an attempt to solely enhance or further a specific political or social agenda. Thank you for the opportunity to freely express my views in support of 1482. We are going to
Madam
go
Chair,
ahead and-
Senator Pace, could I just respond to the comments by Matt Sharp here?
very briefly, and then we're going to move the bill.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair and Matt. I appreciate your comments, and I do share your concern. And I shared with some other members on this committee that I am opposed to the small municipalities banning therapies. I think that this is a statewide issue. I think this is a Board of Therapies issue. I don't think this is a city issue. And so I would support your call to limit their ability to do so. However, as often criticized, I'm a bit nitpicky with the language of bills. And while I know that it is your opinion that the way that this bill is written, that it would still allow for someone to receive punishment from a board or different things like that, it does not expressly say that, nor does it expressly give exception for promotion of violence or promotion of bodily harm. So it doesn't, this is a bill that we're talking is a very, very complicated topic, and we're putting all of it under one bubble of religion. And while most of us here profess in Christianity here, there are other religions, there are other smaller sects of religion that have much harsher beliefs on homosexuality that involve bodily harm or death. And so I can't support the language in this bill because I believe it gives too much protection. And for those who, on the other side want to know, the other response is, if we don't pass this, it doesn't stop or prevent conversion therapy. So it will still exist with or without this bill. But Madam Chair, that was my response to his, and thank you for the time.
Madam Chair, I have a question before you move the bill.
I would just say, I think that, considering some of the concerns, I I would imagine the sponsor would be amenable to amending on the floor to clarify some of these concerns. I mean, I would. Who had their hand up? I'm sorry.
This is Senator Gonzalez.
Senator Gonzalez.
Thank you. Can the staff or somebody please answer this question, or yourself? I was looking on the RTS and I can't really, in our RTS, we can't tell how many people actually request to speak. Can somebody answer how many people actually request to speak and maybe didn't get the opportunity because we're doing 4 and 4?
Right. I have the list here, and I believe there's about 13 against and 3 for. So it was quite a list. Mr.
Madam
Vice
Chair, if
Chair.
you'd like me, I can move the bill.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, I move Senate Bill 1482 with a due pass recommendation, and I move the 6-line Barto amendment dated February 16th in 2021 at 3:09 p.m. be adopted.